Sohail, thank you very much for talking to us on Talk Beliefs. So I'd just like to start off, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what your beliefs were at that time and the beliefs of your family?
Well, thank you for having me on here. Well, basically, I was brought up in a very kind of a Salafi Wahhabi household. I was born into it, so they were very kind of pretty much non-violent extremists. Um, Basically, I was brought up believing that the United Kingdom is at war with Islam, that all non-Muslims are the enemy, that it is the duty of every Muslim to fight violent jihad in defense of their brothers and sisters
Right.
around the world and in defense of their religion. I was taught to hate anything that was British. I didn't consider myself to be British at all in any sense. I would have laughed at the idea of a Muslim calling themselves British. I would have seen them as like kind of like white wannabes.
Yeah.
Use that racist term to kind of describe them that way. So that's pretty much how I was brought up, and I basically studied that form of Islam in depth, and to the extent that a lot of people, like in my friend circle in college, in school, would kind of approach me to ask me questions
Yeah.
related to kind of Islam, because I had so much more knowledge than the kind of like the general kind of Muslim about Islam.
Yeah.
Because I just spent all of my time studying it and learning it, and I really believed it. So yeah.
Right. So what started you to doubt things?
Well, I guess I always had doubts. The things that I believed in, for example, that Islam should take over the world, that you kill people if they leave Islam, that you stone people to death, that you chop off people's hands for stealing something. Those kinds of things always kind of, they didn't fit right with me. But even though I had those kind of doubts, I would push those kinds of thoughts, those questions, out of my mind, because I was afraid of burning in hell if I kind of
Yeah.
questioned my religious beliefs, if I questioned God, if I questioned Allah, if I questioned Islam. I was terrified of that idea. I was terrified of burning in hell for that. So because of that, I kind of went further into that kind of radical mode of thinking, and you know at one I mean it was like when I kind of first started university. I was studying medicine then. I started having very serious doubts about religion and about Islam specifically, and about God in particular. And it's interesting what my doubt was about, because it wasn't about, oh, does God exist, or oh, maybe revelation is untrue. It wasn't anything that kind of would make an atheist doubt.
Yeah.
It was very much from within the framework of Islam that this doubt came about. So, for example, most Muslims believe in something called black magic. It's mentioned in the Quran, and you basically believe that. Now, one of the kind of the proofs that Muhammad was the messenger of Allah, was that he performed miracles, and we have an accurate historical record of those, because in the form of hadith, which are narrations or prophetic traditions.
So similar to the Christian Gospels, perhaps.
Pretty much. Believing in the kind of the whole kind of concept of testimony, eyewitness testimony, and kind of verbal testimony. So it's pretty much very very similar in that respect. So I believe that, but then I ask myself this question: if as a Muslim I believe in black magic, how do I know that Muhammad wasn't a magician? Right?
Yeah.
Then I reasoned with myself. I said, oh, because no other magician did what he did, could do what he did. Wouldn't other magicians have pointed out to him like, hey, we can do that too. That's a lie. But then I asked myself this question: what if he was one of the best magicians that's ever existed? Right? Yeah. It would make sense if like he did really crazy stuff that other people couldn't do. So then I was like, whoa, I couldn't find a response to that, and I kind of looked around everywhere, asked a lot of people, studied, read a lot of books, studied in depth with this, asked scholars, and they couldn't find the books. I mean, they couldn't find the answer to this question. And it was just kind of, then one doubt led to another. How do I know actually Islam is true, and all this stuff that I believe in, about jihad and stuff, that doesn't feel right. And what about evolution? I've always been, like, my favorite subject in school has always been science. I've always been interested in science. Science is literally my life. And the fact that 99% of biologists all agree that evolution happened, and then basically most Muslims then turn around and say, or at least the kind of Islam that I was brought up in, turns around and says, well, actually, you know what, it's not true because Allah says in the Quran it's not. That kind of bothered me a lot, and that kind of caused me a lot of doubts as well. So basically for another 4 years after that, I had these doubts, and I wasn't sure if Allah existed. I wasn't sure if God existed. I wasn't sure if Islam was true. I wasn't sure if Muhammad was the messenger of Allah. And because of that, I felt really depressed. I became really depressed. I became suicidal. But unfortunately, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, but unfortunately for me then, I couldn't take my own life to kind of end the suffering, because even though perversely I doubted whether Allah existed and whether Islam was true, at the same time I was 100% certain that if I did die, I would burn in hell forever for doubting Islam. So it was like two very completely contradictory like ideas. It was like my mind was like fractured into small pieces, and I had like these kind of disparate beliefs at the same time that were contradicting each other. But I kind of, I believed in both of them. So it was like it was really like a really tough time. So eventually, I just thought, you know what, I can't hack this anymore. I can't deal with this anymore. I've been trying to push these doubts out of my mind for 4 years now, and I'm feeling depressed. I mean, I'm feeling suicidal. This isn't working. So then I basically then decided to gather the courage to actually deal with these doubts head on. And that was actually the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life.
I bet. Yeah.
It was the most terrifying thing I'd done in my life, because now I was basically, going out there and actually placing my future in terms of my future in the afterlife, which is for eternity. I was risking myself burning in hell forever if I made one misstep, a miscalculation. I was risking that, and it was terrifying. But I'd had enough of it, so I decided to question. I decided to kind of pursue my doubts. I decided to research them, to look into it openly, with an open mind. And the first thing I did was look into the issue of evolution. Because when it comes to the issues of whether God exists and whether, Islam is true, these are kind of more metaphysical questions that you can't really get answers to. Whereas the question of evolution, whether evolution is true, was a question that I felt I could get a clear answer to. And I then basically decided to study evolution properly. I mean, I'd gone through school. I got like A star in science, GCSE. I got A star in biology. But I'd only ever studied what I needed to know for the exams. But for this time, I decided to study it in depth, and I looked at the evidences for evolution. I looked at the counter arguments against the evidences, and then the counter arguments against those. And I looked at all of the arguments from both sides, and I really did it with an open mind.
Yeah, so really in depth.
Yeah, really in depth. I did it with an open mind. And I realized that actually evolution happened. There's no way you can, say evolution didn't happen, whilst remaining, true to your own kind of intellect, whilst using reason. And I realized evolution is true. Once I realized evolution was true, I was kind of thrown into this crisis. Because now, suddenly, I realized that what I'd been believing in for all of my life, for 22 years, was wrong. At least part of it. So, the immediate problem was that there was a contradiction between me believing in evolution, knowing that evolution is true, and my religion. So what I did is that I realized, wait, I either have to leave Islam, or I'll have to revise my understanding of Islam. So at this stage, I started looking at this, the work of this guy called Osama Hassan. He works for Quilliam Foundation. He's the theologian who works with them.
And for anyone who doesn't know what it is, can you explain just briefly what the Quilliam Association is?
Yeah, the Quilliam Foundation is the world's first counter-extremism think tank. And basically what they deal with is they focus on Islamism, Islamist extremism and jihadism.
Right.
And they basically form a counter-narrative against, radical Islamism. So that's the work they do. It's headed by Majid Nawaz, who's also a former radical Islamist like myself. He was a member of an organization called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a very extreme international organization that basically tries to establish the caliphate, or the khilafah as it's referred to in Arabic, tries to establish the khilafah by instigating violent coups in Muslim countries. And they've actually had a measure of success in doing that, especially like in Pakistan. I think at least like 4 coup attempts have been kind of discovered in Pakistan from within the military.
Yeah.
And all of them were linked to Hizb ut-Tahrir. So they're a very dangerous organization. And Majid Nawaz himself was a member of that organization. I think I'm digressing. But basically, Osama Hassan is an interesting individual because he was also a Salafi Wahhabi, like me. He went to fight jihad in Afghanistan when the Russians were there, and he was pretty much a firebrand preacher. Hate the West is evil, etc.
Sure.
And I used to go to his mosque since the age of 6, so I've known him since I was a kid. So he played a very big part in radicalizing me. But then after he kind of, there was a point where he actually kind of became de-radicalized. And he was one of the first imams, and actually, to my knowledge, was the first imam that actually openly came out and said, I believe in evolution. Evolution is true and it does not go against Islam. And he got a massive backlash. Death threats, he had to have police security, even Al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization in Somalia.
Yeah.
They basically made a propaganda video, and in the propaganda video, Osama Hassan was featured, and they said, we're going to kill him. So
how long ago was this?
This was a few years ago, I think. He first came out and said that he believes in evolution. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe around 3-4 years ago.
So it's very recent.
I might be wrong.
But it's still recent, yeah.
I think so. I'll find out, and if I'm wrong, I'll let you know.
Okay.
So basically, he kind of came out and said that, and I always respected him because I was always interested in science. I always did well in science, and Osama Hassan went and studied astrophysics at Cambridge. So he was really he was an intelligent guy. He was a scientist. I really respected him. I really looked up to him. And then he came out and said, I believe in evolution. And whilst I disagreed with him, what kind of disagreed with me more was the way kind of like the rest of the congregation and my family were kind of dealing with him and were responding to him. They were saying like, oh, he's a kafir, a non-Muslim. He's a monkey. He's, all kinds of like crazy stuff. And that would really annoy me because I knew he was intelligent. And whilst I disagreed with him, I was sure that he did have a very good reason for believing in what he was believing. Yeah. I thought everyone was making a straw man of his position. I don't agree with him, so my thinking went, I don't agree with him, but at least give him the respect he deserves and deal with his arguments in a kind of like a reasonable manner. So even when he kind of came out and said that, I still respected him, was completely disagreeing with him. But then, he kind of came out and said that, and when I kind of, finally when I started, this is so a good few years after that happened, now I've got to the stage where I'm actually openly pursuing my doubts. I'm studying them, I'm looking into them, and now I'm about to look into evolution. So the first thing I did was straight after I looked at all of the science and looked at all the evidence and realized if evolution was true, the first thing I did after that was search up Osama Hassan and then look at his theological arguments for defending evolution and for saying that evolution doesn't go against the Quran or Islam. Right. So I looked into that and I was very much convinced by what he was saying. So now I'd reached the stage where I'd accepted evolution as true, and I'd reconciled it with my religious beliefs, and that felt amazing. It was like a massive weight was just suddenly off my chest, because this was an issue that had been bothering me since I was a kid. It had always been bothering me. Like, are you sure evolution isn't true? Like, how can all the scientists say that? I knew how the scientific method worked, and I couldn't kind of reconcile the fact that the scientific method would kind of yield an incorrect result that was kind of had so much evidence behind it, but yet, religious people, specifically Muslims, were rejecting evolution because God says. I mean,
And would they refer to it like Christians do, as a belief system?
Exactly, as a belief system. And
rather than based on evidence.
Exactly, and the kind of responses they would come out with was, oh, science isn't perfect. Well, yeah, neither is religion, because if you look at Islam, there's like so many different sects and groups. If it really was perfect, right, as a system, why would there be so many different sects and groups and understandings and contradictory beliefs in there? Right?
Exactly.
That's so my thinking went at that time. So I then basically, reconciled evolution. It felt like I was really happy. But then I thought, wait a minute. I've just changed a major facet of my religious beliefs, of my religion. Such a major facet, such a major part, that basically all of my other Salafi colleagues, the Salafi Wahhabi colleagues, they would have now considered me to be a kafir, a non-Muslim, because I now believed in evolution. That's the extent of the change I went through, which was literally over a period of like 3 days.
Oh, so that's like an apostate, is
yeah,
it?
they considered me to be an apostate, but I didn't consider myself to be one, because I believed at that time that evolution did not go against Islam. But they would have considered me to be one, because they were so extreme in their beliefs. Basically, Salafis and Wahhabis are pretty much the most extreme form of Islam you can find. It's extremely literal, it's extremely puritanical, it's basically medieval Islam applied today in the 21st century. I didn't consider myself, I still consider myself to be Muslim at that time, but they would not have considered me to be one. So once I kind of changed that part of my belief, such a big part, I thought, wait a minute, this feels good. If I've changed such a big part of my religion as it relates to the story of Adam and Eve, why can't I change the other parts of my religion that have been bothering me for so long? Which was believing in jihad, violent jihad, and basically trying to take over the world, believing in offensive jihad, believing that people should be stoned to death, their heads should be chopped off, that you should discriminate against non-Muslims, against the kuffar. These things never fit right with me, even when I was a radical extremist.
So it's like another brick coming out of the wall.
Exactly,
sort of thing.
exactly. So then I thought, wait a minute, why can't I change that? But then, me being me, because I've always been interested in science, and I'm very I always look at things, I always look at evidences and stuff. So, the only reason why I accepted evolution and kind of changed my belief as it related to evolution was because I saw theological arguments from within Islam that made sense to me and convinced me. That's the only way I reconcile those two. So, I wasn't about to, change those parts of my beliefs, those other, the proper radical parts of my belief, unless I could be convinced that they were wrong from within Islam. Because at this stage, I still believed that Islam was the true religion 100% at this stage. Which again kind of contradicts the fact that I was doubting whether Islam was true. But at the same time, I believed that it was true. It's like two very kind of different, conflicting ideas.
The cognitive
dissonance. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so at that stage I still was 100% sure Islam was true. So basically, and I really wanted to remain a Muslim. At this stage I was like, I will do anything to remain a Muslim. So even though now I was kind of pursuing my doubts, I pursued them with the stated aim in my mind that I would remain a Muslim, right? Yeah. That was the whole point of me going through these doubts, so that I could resolve them and remain a Muslim. I didn't do them in order to I wasn't like openly, oh yeah, maybe Islam isn't true. No. I really wanted to remain Muslim. I really wanted to hold on to it. So, then I started to study the kind of progressive Islamic theology behind progressive Islamic theology and kind of like the interpretations that, you know, didn't have offensive jihad, that kind of explained why those verses were there, but then kind of explained actually we don't apply them today because they don't apply today, because you place those verses within a socio-historical context and you look at Islam holistically as a whole, right? So, you know, I started studying that, and I studied that for a good few months, and I was convinced that actually liberal progressive Islam was more convincing than the Salafi Wahhabi Islamist jihadist Islam that I'd been following. So I became a very kind of progressive liberal Muslim. I no longer believed in offensive jihad. For the first time ever in my life, I felt proud to be British. And when I felt proud to be British, I felt really proud to be British, because I realized, wait a minute, Britain is doing so many good things around the world. In fact, Britain has been treating me as an equal citizen, giving me free NHS care, giving me a free education, giving me the right to vote. It's been treating me as an equal citizen, even though I hated Britain and I wanted to destroy Britain. But even despite those views that I had, Britain still treated me as an equal citizen, as a human. And for that, I felt such overwhelming, like, I'm not sure if appreciation is the right word, but, you know, I really, that meant a lot to me. So suddenly, you know, I felt really proud to be British. You know, that kind of like simultaneously proud to be British and really proud to be Muslim. So I was proud of both of those at the same time. And, you know, I felt really happy. And one of the things that kind of helped me on my kind of, you know, picking up progressive Islam and becoming de-radicalized after I kind of looked at evolution was something that Majid Nawaz said. And he was giving a TV interview, and he said, when I was in prison in Egypt for being a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Islamist organization, I started studying Islam from the original texts in Arabic, the texts that were written by the classical scholars.
Yeah.
And he said this, I realized that all of the issues that we're grappling with today, as it relates to human rights, as it relates to jihad, as it relates to equality, as it relates to women's rights, all of these issues, they were grappling with back then as well. And they actually had very different, like, kind of a multiplicity of views. Many of them actually supported human rights and actually said, you know what, even though it says slavery is allowed in the Quran, we shouldn't have slaves.
And this was hundreds of years ago.
This was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We're talking about, like, the classical scholars, like, you know, like just a little while after Islam had kind of, you know, come into existence, after just a while after, a few hundred years after the Prophet Muhammad had died. So these were the kinds of discussions were happening at that time. Also, imagine what I said. I wasn't sure if it was true at the time, but it piqued my interest and it really inspired me. I thought, wow, that's amazing. I really want that to be true, because the beliefs that I'm holding now, as it relates to jihad and all the extremist stuff, I didn't like them, and I really wanted to kind of, you know, wanted to find a way within Islam that could, you know, one, convince me in terms of the theological aspect from the evidences from the Quran itself, convince me that it's true, these interpretations, but at the same time could kind of allow me to be who I wanted to be,
Sure.
in terms of, you know, following my own conscience rather than just kind of parroting what a book said. So, you know, I then started studying that, and I realized what Majid Nawaz had said was true, and that's when I kind of became fully de-radicalized. Yeah,